way he likes to play on his piano.
From the start, their act was based around Patti's lead, with Maxine always singing above and Laverne always below, giving the girls an instantly recognisable sound. Retro trio the Papini Sisters have taken inspiration from this and perform versions of the Andrews Sisters songs, such as Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy, in which they recreate the famous harmonies.
Okay, so if I start with the melody goes, he was a famous trumpet man from old Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft.
Okay, so I'm then a third below.
He was the famous trumpet man from old Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft.
So they pretty much mirror each other note for note, except sometimes her line goes up and mine just stays on the same.
I mean, if you were to forget notation and just kind of draw a line in terms of which way the melody moves, you'd find that they're just parallel lines beneath it most of the time, especially in that song. It's so triadic in the way that the parts are layered that it just moves a lot in blocks.
Let's add you to that. 1, 2, 1, 2.
He was a famous trumpet man from old Chicago way. He had a boogie style that no one else could play. He was a top man at his craft. But then his number came up and he was gone with the draft. He's in the army now, a blowing reveille. He's the boogie woogie bugle boy of Company B.
Although harmony singing was at the core of the trio, it was when they sang in unison that the brassy quality of the sound shone through.
Hold tight, Furriakerstacky, want some seafood, mama.
Maxine, I think, said to me at one point, people would always say to us, how did you get your sound? How did you get your blend? And she said, where we got it from was, we listened to the horns. Clearly, where they got that from was sitting up there on the stage with those bands, listening to those horns and the way that the horns interacted.
The Andrews Sisters had this unique style. They were swing personified. They were the Benny Goodman and the Glenn Miller and the Artie Shaw bands combined all in one in this vocal harmony. And the harmony was fantastic.
When I get home late at night, I get my favorite dish, fish.
The sisters continued to record and tour with some of the great band leaders of the day, such as Paul Whiteman and Jimmy Dorsey, with whom they recorded some of their best songs. And in 1940, they were invited to share a radio show with a name synonymous with the big band era, Glenn Miller.
Interestingly, the sponsors felt that Miller was not quite as well known at that point as they would like to sustain the show. So they brought in the Andrews Sisters, who was better known at that point than Glenn Miller.
America's #1 dance band with America's #1 swing trio. Glenn Miller and the Andrews Sisters, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, 3 times every week.
And it's a real pleasure to say again, Laverne, Patti, and Maxine, the Andrews Sisters singing by Mir Bistushane.
Mir Bistushane, again I'll explain.
It's interesting to hear them together. You know, they were still Vic Shone's arrangements, even though they were performed by Glenn Miller's band. So to get that kind of backing for them, it's really a wonderful sound.
It only helps me tell you how grand you are.
By the beginning of the 1940s, the Andrews Sisters songs were all over America, and with their success, the reputation of Decca also grew. Bing Crosby, the world's leading entertainer at the time, was also a Decca artist, and label boss Jack Kapp invited him to record with the sisters. Over the next 10 years, the Andrews Sisters and Bing Crosby became one of the most successful recording partnerships of all time. Their first recording was Chirry Birry Bin and Yodelin' Jive.
Yo ho ho ho, little lady, lady.
He sings his yodelin' jive, yodelin' jive.
Crosby was so laid back and so musical, and the girls were so willing and so intimidated by this megastar who they were recording with. Patti talked about the way that if Bing came into the studio, and they never called him Bing, it was always Mr. Crosby, but when Bing came in the studio and he had his hat on, as he always did, and the brim was down, he was no nonsense. And they knew they were going to go right to business, no small talk, get it right the first time. But if the brim was up, and that meant that Crosby was probably in a pretty good mood, and they had a little bit more relaxed circumstance. By the time they got into 3 or 4 of their duets further in, you began to understand, and you can even hear this sort of camaraderie they shared.
The trio were rich and successful, having signed a new Decca contract to match Bing Crosby's. But although Laverne was in her late 20s, all 3 sisters lived with their parents in a hotel suite.
It was during this period that the first break came within the Andrews family. The split was essentially between Patty and Maxine, who wanted more freedom, who wanted these boyfriends, who wanted more money, and Laverne and Mom and Papa, who thought the status quo was okay. You know, you shouldn't be dating these guys. It's going to mess up the act. You know, if we split up the act, we'll be back in Minnesota with nothing.
They were on the road since they were babies. That never gave them a chance to be sisters. There must have been all kinds of animosity, you know, all kinds of regrets of losing a childhood or whatever. It wasn't easy.
But they were not allowed to go out with boyfriends unless they were chaperoned by their parents, and sometimes the entire family. Like if Maxine had a date, Laverne, Patty, and Mama and Papa would be along.
As a result, the girls began dating secretly behind their parents' backs. Maxine, the most independent of the 3, dated their manager and agent Lou Levy. They married in 1942, keeping their union secret for nearly 2 years for fear of Papa's reaction. Levy was one of the most important figures in the trio's career.
He made them stars. He knew what to do with them. He got them in the right places, got them the right clothes. He took care of them and made them the big stars they were.
I don't think the Andrews sisters would have ordered a cup of coffee without Lou Levy telling them when to get it and what sort of coffee it should be. It was almost as if he were their puppeteer. Whatever they did because of him.
Oh, you can take the high road or you can take the low road. Go the way the wind is blowing.
Lou Levy sought to maximize the girls' potential.
As long as you keep...
Having conquered both radio and the jukebox, the sisters dreamt of a move to Hollywood, and in 1940 they signed a contract with Universal Studios. For their first movie, the studio paired the girls with comic trio the Ritz Brothers in the musical farce Argentine Nights.
They said, oh, girls, when you come to Hollywood, we are going to give you the best of everything. We're going to give you the best wardrobe. They got the wardrobe from the extras department. We're going to give you the best hair and makeup man. The makeup man was Jack Pierce. The beauties he had transformed before them were the Wolfman and Frankenstein. So you can imagine that when they went in to do Argentine Nights with the Ritz Brothers, Maxine was horrified. Patty was horrified, and I know, without having to conjure her up at all, that Laverne had to have been out of her mind, because when you see the way they dressed them up, oh my goodness, they look horrible.
The 3 of them went to the opening. They had not seen it, and when they saw how they photographed, especially in their first scene, in the ugliest dresses ever made, terrible close-ups, they were horrified. And they just sunk down in their seats and they walked home crying all the way.
Argentine Nights was a critical flop, but to Universal's surprise, audiences across America reacted positively to seeing the sisters on screen for the first time. The studio decided to pair the girls with the famous comic duo Bud Abbott and Lou Costello in their next film, Buck Privates.
The Andrews system. Oh, boy! You're a lucky fellow, Mr. Smith, to be able to live as you do, and to have that swell Miss Liberty gal carrying the torch for you.
This film was before we had gotten into the war. It was preparing America for what was really starting to go on in Europe and getting closer and closer to the United States. But we were still in a very playful, musical attitude.
those pictures start to be pictures where people are in uniform. That's become emblematic, that's become iconic. When we think of the Andrews Sisters, we tend to think of them wearing those uniforms.
All of the girls' movies were essentially a vehicle for a song and dance routine built around a silly plot. 1941's Buck Privates included two of the sisters' most famous songs, In Apple Blossom Time and Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy.
He makes the company jump when he plays reveille. He's the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B.
Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy just knocked everyone dead. It was danceable. It was upbeat.
And when he played Boogie Woogie Bugle, he was dizzy as a bzzz.
In a sense, they became glamorous in army uniforms, which is very interesting. They weren't dressed up, and yet the fellas would look at them like goddesses.
He puts the boys to sleep with Boogie every night and wakes them up the same way in the early fright. They clap their hands and stamp their feet because they know how he plays. When someone gives him a beat, he really breaks it up. When he plays reveille, he is the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company.
They did all their own choreography. That was one of the unique things about them. They didn't just stand around a microphone and sing prettily. They had a lot of pizzazz when they were performing. They moved.
The company jumps when he plays reveille. He is the Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy of Company B.
The sisters settled into their fledgling film career and the relaxed lifestyle on the West Coast. One of their greatest fans in Hollywood was their good friend, film producer A.C. Lyles.
The Andrews Sisters, my gosh, they were such a legend. In a movie, they didn't have to be big actors, just perform, just be the Andrews.
So long, goodbye sailor, see you again.
Millions of their fans were delighted with their film appearances, and the crowds flocked to see Buck Privates and its sequel in the Navy.
Bridge, all aircraft.
I'll go out to you, 'cause you're off to see the world.
Well, their movies were war musicals, a new genre. The movie studios, all of them, helped to promote that with their insanely patriotic movies. Saluting all the time, red, white, and blue all the time. Gung-ho patriotism.
In December 1941, the dreamlike war musicals turned into reality. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor signaled the United States' entry into the Second World War. America pulled together to support her troops, a role that was especially important for entertainers like the Andrews Sisters.
They had very strong feelings about supporting the war effort and entertaining the GIs. And again, this was not unique to them. It was the case with all of America.
To buy a share of freedom today.
The Andrews Sisters spent the first years of the war entertaining the troops on the home front, visiting army bases, military hospitals and navy yards all over the country with the United Services Organizations, the non-profit outfit that provides moral support to the US military. Along with other major Hollywood stars, they also entertained the servicemen in a cafe specially opened for GIs in Los Angeles, the Hollywood Canteen.
Good evening, Hollywood Canteen. Oh yes, all the stars are here tonight. You say you want to come down? No, I'm sorry. The canteen is for servicemen. The only way you can see the canteen is to join the Army, the Navy, the Marines.
Admission was free for anyone in uniform. The stars would all entertain. They would serve the meals. They would make the coffee and hand it to them. They would go in the back and wash the dishes. It was the stars were there. The soldiers would dance with them and talk with them and have them serve their meals by character actors and singers and Western stars and glamour girls and a whole lot of them.
One of the singing stars to entertain the troops at the canteen was Margaret Whiting.
They'd get a couple of days off and they'd come to the canteen to see who was on. And you had a great audience. And when the Andrews came and sang, the joint was loaded. Oh, they loved them.
So if you hail from the Bronx, Des Moines, or Aberdeen, come down and ask for us at the Hollywood Canteen.
The Andrews Sisters were very big attractions. And you'd see them looking wide-eyed and mouth open, and just, those were the Andrews sisters they were watching perform.